I wanted to give a talk on some things that I picked up working from home. It's been now, I think, 5 or 6 years since the last time I've worked at a job where I was office only. And I've spent some time working for companies that were completely distributed, smaller teams. I've spent some time working for a company that allowed me to work in the office half the week and out of the office half the week. And I've also spent the past 2 years now working for a company that's kind of a hybrid, but I'm full-time remote. So we have teams that are completely remote and teams that are in an office. So I've had a lot of different experience, and I've seen different things that work for the teams and work for individuals in all those places. And so I wanted to share some of the things that I learned, not necessarily because they're the exact same things you'll want to do, but because the way I approach it has helped me to become a better remote employee and more productive. And the other thing is, a lot of times, if I tell somebody I work remote, a lot of people are interested in doing that, or their company, like especially small companies, they're like, well, we might want to do that, but and they think it might be a relatively easy transition, especially if you're used to working only in an office. But the key that I've found is you can't just start doing it one day. You have to have kind of a strategy and a method to get to that point and still be productive and successful and not encounter burnout or loneliness or things like that. So for me, I needed a good strategy. I needed a good set of guide rails and rules for myself to be able to do it. So this is me. I'm here too, but that's me yesterday in my home office. And it's I can be very productive, but I also have to make sure that there are some things to avoid, like having boundary issues. So, but before we talk about the pro tips that I have, I wanted to kind of remind people of the actual pros to working from home, because sometimes people argue that working from home can be less productive for teams, especially for software teams, than having a tight-knit group sitting right next to each other. And I want to explore some of the reasons why a company might choose to have remote employees, or you as an individual might choose to be a remote employee. One of the main ones is cost savings. It's actually a very measurable statistic that both the employee and the employer save a lot of money by having employees work remotely. One nice thing is for employers is they can hire from a larger talent pool, and oftentimes can pay salaries that they don't have to pay for people in their immediate vicinity. So if you're a company that's in a major city that requires a pretty high cost of living, you can save by hiring developers who are outside your city center and typically not have to pay as much. As an employee, it also saves you, on average, $4,500 to $5,000 a year in commute costs and things like going out to eat and associated costs with having a separate office environment that you go to. Another big benefit, one that I take for granted now because I've been doing it so long, but it's something that every time I actually go somewhere in rush hour traffic, I'm reminded of how awesome it is to not have to drive somewhere or travel somewhere in a metro or go somewhere in a bus or anything like that. There's no commute, and on average in the U.S., I don't know how it is in Europe, but in the U.S., the average person spends 38 hours every year in transport to their job. So sure, if you're on a metro or if you're on a bus or something, you might be able to be slightly productive, but you can't really get into a flow state. You can't really get in deep into a book or something when you're sitting there, especially if you're driving it, even if you have Tesla Autopilot. But nothing beats not having to do it at all, being able to walk downstairs or walk into another room to start working. So that's a full work week every year that you're literally just sitting in some sort of vehicle moving to your work or moving back from your work. Another thing is you have the ability to increase your flow state. So who here would be an engineer, developer, that kind of person? Somebody who writes code. Okay, so you guys, anyone else who does writing or authoring or any creative kind of work besides the developers? Nobody here. So, I think most of you will understand there's there's times when you can focus on a task, and being able to kind of block out all distractions. It can happen in a place that's noisy, in a place that has lots of people around you. But often it's easier if you can control your environment more. So, sometimes I see signs like this in an office, or you've seen pictures where there's a line of developers and everybody has those giant studio headphones. And when I worked in an office environment, I had giant studio headphones. I had to pay like $250 for the things. And I tried different headphones until I found the ones that blocked out the right sound and gave me the right environment in my ears so that I could focus better. But when I see things like this, I think it's a failure of your environment to be able to work and get into your flow state. So it is good to have that collaboration. I'm not saying that you don't want to have free-flowing ideas and things, but I think that people sometimes oversell the idea of everybody has to be right next to each other and always talking and always moving around. That's not how we get the deep thought and the ideas and the processes in place that we need to change our environment and to change our code and make it work. So another one is measurably, people who work from home tend to have a healthier lifestyle. And there's many different reasons for it. One is you tend to eat out less, as somebody who's worked in both situations and worked from home as a single person versus as a married person, I can see like there's certain things that lead to me going out more, like if I'm stressed or if I am with some coworkers and there's the peer pressure of, hey, we're all going here, and even if I have my lunch, you go there, and you tend to eat a little less wisely if you're not controlling all your food intake at your place where you live. Also, you have obviously less exposure to sickness. So you're still getting out and doing things, but on a daily basis, there's a lot of people who will come to a workplace with some sickness or another. I try to avoid that. Like when I worked in an office, if I was even a little bit sick, I just wouldn't come in because I don't want to have the flu spread around the office just because I decided to work sick one day. But not everybody's like that. So less exposure to that kind of stuff. Also, partly due to the commute, but also partly due to some other reasons, you have more time for exercise and fitness and things. So instead of sitting in my car for an hour or sometimes 2 or 3 hours because there's an accident, I can take a walk with my family, or I can go on a run or take a bike ride. And I'll get into ways that you can focus on actually accomplishing those goals later. You also don't have free donuts, free pizza, that kind of stuff. That's one of every time there was a donut at work, it just called out to me, and I had to have one. But the cool thing about working from home is now a donut is actually it's a reward instead of something I expect to have every Friday or Monday or whatever. So I don't eat pizza that much. I don't eat donuts that much. I don't eat all those snacky foods that you can get at a workplace. And so now I want to get into the actual tips, things that I've learned. And the 3 different areas, I think they kind of increase in importance, but they're also foundational. So the environment is important because you need to have a place that you are in that's conducive to how you work. And then communication is important so that you can actually do work. And then discipline is important so that when you start off with that spark of being interested and feeling like you're being so productive, you can carry that on into the future. Because a lot of people start working remote, they're really successful for a few weeks, a few months, something like that, and then it kind of peters out over time. So these are the 3 things that I kind of focus on. The first one is, I found this to be extremely important for pretty much everybody that I've talked to, is having a completely separate office space. So when you're working in an office, you drive somewhere else and you're completely outside of your normal leisure realm, unless you have one of these offices with ping pong tables and foosball and all that kind of stuff. That's a little different. But you want to have a separate space in your house. So even in those places with those things, they have a leisure area and they have a work area. So you want to have a separation. And if you have a really small workspace at home, you might not be able to separate it that well. But you still want to have some separation. One of the main things for that is making sure that you leave your computer in your office, and also in your IRS reporting, you can put that square footage down as a tax break, which is nice. It's not a big tax break, but every little bit counts. Another way to save a little money every year. And So what I did, and if this is what your current office looks like, talk to me afterwards. I'll give you some ideas. This was in my house, the basement. I had some space. This was actually after I cleaned it up quite a bit. We had boxes and things all over the place. But I decided after we had our second kid and I no longer had that spare bedroom, I decided to build myself an actual office in my basement. So I'm fortunate to be relatively handy, and when I'm not handy, I look on YouTube and find out how to be handy. And I have a couple friends and a dad who helps me quite a bit. But this was a really fun project for me. I actually posted it on Reddit. I can give you the link after the talk if you want, of the whole process, getting inspections and the code and getting some cool new power tools, things like that. And I ended up with an office that looks like this from the outside. And one of my main goals wasn't to create a really awesome environment that feels fun and hip and things. I just wanted an office. I wanted it to be very plain. And I wanted to know when I went through that door, I'm in my office environment. So that was important to me. And another cool thing about this process is I was, as I was looking like, how do I get a door? How do I get whatever else? I found that there was a business that was closing down in St. Louis that I called them up and said, hey, can I come in and scavenge some things? So I got like a $1,000 office door and a $300 desk and a $500 table and things. I just grabbed them because when offices close, they usually just leave some things behind because they have a scratch on them or whatever. So when you're building your environment, see if there's a business closing. Look on Craigslist. You don't need to pay $10,000. Part of the reason I do this is for the cost savings. Here, as you can see, was me working. And another thing that I did, since this is your environment, you can really customize things to be exactly how you want. So if I'm in an office space, I can't have the lighting the way I want. I can't have the right desk arm because the maintenance staff won't approve a desk arm that's more than 22 inches because of some regulation that they have in the office space. You can make your office your own. Give it some of your personality. You don't need to make it so horribly mundane that it feels totally like a soul-sucking office. I have my Doctor Who poster behind me, so every time I'm in a video chat, somebody sees it. It's a good conversation starter. And I put a plant there because my aunt said that it looked too plain and boring without it. So this is the view that I see when I'm at my standing desk. But there's some other things too that are important besides just having a good office space that's completely separate. One is having a dedicated work computer. And I actually, for the first time I worked remote, I didn't have this. I did all my work on my personal computer. So a lot of times what would end up happening is I'd be working, it'd come dinner time, I'd just turn off the screen or something. I'd go eat dinner, then I'd come back to do something else, and then I'd see, oh, this task was not finished at work. So I'd get into it, and I'd end up working an extra 3 or 4 hours every day. And it really drains you. Maybe an employer would say, oh, that's great, you're working more time for me, but really it makes the employee less productive. It makes you feel less like you have leisure time and free time. You need that. You need a balance between work and your regular life. And before I got married and before I got a separate computer, those were things that I didn't have as much of, and that's one reason why I went back to more of an office environment for a while. So get a dedicated work computer. And oftentimes employers will actually provide these, so that's really helpful. Also, as I said, I could customize this office to exactly what I wanted. So I got 4100 Kelvin lights with a CRI of 93. If you don't know those numbers, you'll start learning them when you start building an office environment for yourself. And I have thousands of lumens of light output in my office. I found one of the things I hate the most about an office environment is a buzzing fluorescent light that's like 3000 Kelvin or something, and you have sunlight coming in through a window that's not the right tint, and it's just everything grates on me in that environment. So when I built this, I said, I'm going to get some nice LED lighting, exactly how I want. I tested a few different color temperatures. I found the one that I felt was productive. I also set the lights in a way so that when I'm in a video conference, I don't look like a ghost or I don't look like some weird smeary thing. So when you're building it, pay attention to these things. Another important thing for safety is I'm in a basement. So in St. Louis and a lot of the Midwest and other parts of the U.S., radon is actually a major concern. So I had my basement tested, and we had a rate of like 40 millisieverts or something, which was way off the charts dangerous in terms of breathing it in continuously. Like I think we calculated my cancer risk would go up like 8,000% for lung cancer. So we got a radon system because I don't want to kill myself by working. If I get killed by my work, I want it to be like passionate, awesome work and not breathing the air that I was breathing when I was working. So you can pay attention to those things. Make sure that you have a safe work environment, and you have the control over it. And also, you have a physical environment, so you can control that physical boundary, but also make sure that you communicate that with your family. They know that you're in a workspace, and when you have your door closed, you're working, and they shouldn't be interfering with you. Just like if you're at work, they're not going to drive up there when a kid falls and gets a bruise or something. You can have breaks where your family comes. You can go up to lunch. You can do things like that if you have family at home. You need to be involved in their lives, but they need to know you're working and have that clean separation. So we have some do's. Here's some don'ts. Obviously, having a separate space prevents having your work near leisure space. So TVs and things, don't have those in the area. And make sure your family knows your boundary. Also, other interruptions, like if you have work scheduled for your house or somebody's doing maintenance or something like that, make sure you schedule it appropriately and don't treat it like, oh, I work from home so I can do anything I want during any day of the week. You still have to work, And also, don't ever have a TV or game console near your work area. It's tempting, and I actually had my Xbox sitting next to my desk for a couple years, and it's like every time I was like, it's time for a little break, I'll just play one game of Halo or whatever. Turns into like 30 minutes or an hour, and you realize you're wasting so much time, and then you got to either work later or cut things short. It's just not productive. So leave the remote away from where you're working. If you're in an apartment or something where you don't have as much space, turn your desk away from it. Just make sure that you're not getting distracted by that. And boundaries. You can actually see, I can't use the laser, but my son is actually taking the picture with the little remote there. But they know that when I'm in my office and the door is closed, they don't even knock. They know that I'm working. And if they want to come and ask me a question, either my wife will text me or they'll knock on the door, and I can wave them in, or I can say, not right now. So the second theme that I have is on communication, and this is one where sometimes you actually have to work with other employees and work with your employer on it, making sure that you're doing the right things. So one of the main things is I've worked in one place that had most people not working remote, but a few people would work remote. And the problem that happened is a lot of meetings were set up where everybody was in a room somewhere, but there was no conference line. So we'd get to the meeting, and the remotes would be chatting and emailing, and nobody can respond because they're all sitting around a table, and they don't have their computers open yet. And we're like, we're trying to be in the meeting, but we can't be. So simple solution, if you have remote employees, every meeting, everywhere, every time has to have a conference. Whether it's a phone line or a video chat, whatever it is, it has to have a conference. And there's plenty of tools out there that do this automatically for you. So use them, and there's no excuse if you have remote employees to not do that. Also, as an employee, you need to make sure that you listen. This will actually tie into a later point on avoiding long meetings. Make sure you're present in every meeting and listening actively. One of the worst turnoffs, and one of the excuses that a lot of managers will use to say, I'm not going to allow remote employees, is during a meeting, if you ask a question of somebody who's remote and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, that's basically a sign for I wasn't paying attention to you because I was doing something else. So in meetings, always focus, always listen, be ready to respond, and also know where your mute switch is. I have headphones with a mute switch on them because that shows a little light that shows when I'm muted. It's always fun waiting like 3 minutes for a response and somebody says, oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I just told you everything you need to know. Also, always, if possible, this is a caveat because sometimes it's not possible, use video. So video gives you some of the connection that's missing if you're just using phone or chat. You can see people's faces, you can see their reactions. Another important thing for a long meeting, you can see, are people falling asleep? It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you're in a 2-hour meeting, somebody plans a 2-hour sprint grooming session or something that's really long, you can see, hey, people need a break if you have video. If you're on audio, I've actually seen it happen quite a few times where there's a long meeting and somebody's asking and somebody like either went away for a little bit to come back or whatever. When you're on video, it keeps you honest. It keeps you, it makes you make sure that you're at least a tiny bit well-groomed. Like instead of just waking up and going down, you might have woken up and like shuffled your hair a little bit. And it also helps everybody to kind of see reactions and keep that, the human connection. Because if all meetings were done by text or phone, we could just have computers do it completely. They haven't gotten to the point of holographic displays that can react emotionally yet. So at least we have that on them. So the last thing is have some sort of always online chat system available. There's tons of tools out there. I'm not going to go through them here because they change every day. But use one. Make sure that everybody is on it. Make sure it's like a default of I wake up in the morning, I go to work. When I go to work, I open chat. The other cool thing about chat, as opposed to using something like phones, is I can control my notifications. So every person's individual in what level of notifications they need. I basically turn them all off because I know I always have a new email, I always have a new chat notification, and I always have new notifications wherever else I have notifications. So for myself, I turn them all off, and that's the way that I stay productive. For somebody who might only get a few notifications a day, it's not as important to have the notifications off, but they can control them for themselves. So use that. And finally, this is one that requires an interaction between you and your employer. Make sure that you have clear goals, and I'm not talking personal development. I'm thinking more of, what is the project you're working on? What is your role on the project? And what is your end goal for that project? And think of like, what are ways that I can measure my progress, measure my success? Because A, it'll keep you accountable. Employers always like accountability. But B, it'll also make sure that you see that you're doing something. You're actually being successful as part of a team instead of just, you did this website. It's like, no, what did I do? I built this thing. I built this other thing. I contributed this thing. Make some of those goals. Make sure you document them. Track your progress. Don't ever passively listen. So that's pretty obvious. Talking about the example of somebody being asked a question and they ask you, what did you ask? It's very rare that there's actually like a slight breakup in the audio all of a sudden when somebody asks a question. It's almost always, I wasn't listening, but nobody ever says that. They say, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, my connection broke up. So don't passively listen. Don't be unreachable. That doesn't mean you're always available outside of work hours. That means during work hours, make sure that even if you're taking a break or you're going to lunch or something, make sure that your chat notification, your status is right, and make sure that people see, hey, you're online. Don't forget to open your chat application in the morning. You can even have a little script that runs on your calendar or something to open it up, that kind of thing. And also, all these different things can help you actually to avoid long and pointless meetings. One reason is you can save a lot of bandwidth costs, so that's a practical concern that you can bring to your boss. But also, if everybody's remote and you are speaking in turn and people are more collaborating in that style as opposed to everybody sitting around a table shooting the bull and that kind of stuff, then you can actually focus a little better on the topic at hand. And sometimes even if you have a phone call instead of video, it's easier to do this. But you can use these tools to help you avoid those meetings and also tell people like, look, as a remote employee, this really breaks up my workflow. Can we break this meeting down or do it in email, that kind of thing? Because this is how I see any meeting that's more than about 20 minutes. And finally, the most important thing for me is discipline, because this is what people think and say a lot of times, especially if you're a very outgoing person and you feel like remote work would not jive with what you do, or you feel like the people who are working remote must not be productive, or they must have something wrong with them. A lot of times they'll kind of like smugly say, oh, you're so productive, you're not even here with us, that kind of thing. And you know that they're coming from that. The important thing is to have the discipline to be able to prove to them, I'm still productive, and in fact, I can be more productive if I control my environment. So one of the most important things for myself, and these things, these routines that I'll mention are things that I found work for me. They might be a little different for you, or they might be completely opposite. Probably not on the most part. But one of the things that I do is I wake up and I have breakfast, and then I always start work between 8:30 and 9. Sometimes I'll work on a personal task, or I'll just hang out with my family or do whatever, but I always start work between 8:30 and 9. That way people know that I'll be available at that time. And then I finish up around 5 o'clock, and I have lunch. And I put these things in my calendar too. I don't put when I start, but I'll have lunch, and I put that in my calendar as unavailable, that kind of stuff, so people know when I'm on and when I'm off. I also do my timesheets every Friday at 3:30, no matter what. I put that in my calendar. That way, I also avoid having people set up meetings on Fridays at 3:30, which is nice, because that way you kind of finish the day, finish the week. Those are some of the things that I do. Also, another important thing to do, and this goes into helping you have a healthier life, is just eat healthy food. Don't go out to eat if you're working from home. You can go out to eat every now and then, especially if you have some other people that you would like go and eat with. But eat healthy, get things that are well prepared. I'm very fortunate to have a significant other who also lives at home and helps me with this. Also set boundaries, as I said earlier, with your family and with maintenance and things like that. Make sure that they know when you're working and when you're not. And then for the don'ts, basically, don't be that guy. It's actually cut off, but he's also smoking a cigarette in that picture. It's don't become a recluse. And one of the great ways to avoid doing that is go to local user meetups. Especially if you're not married, or if you don't have a significant other, if you're not living with other people in your place, it can be easy to become a recluse and become more introverted. But come to meetups, come to events like this, go to a coffee shop one day a week, something like that. Those are all ways to keep that kind of human connection going. Also, don't slack in your nutrition, your health, or especially your hygiene. I'm not going to say this has never happened, but typically I try to at least dress in a decent shirt that's not all wrinkly, as well as some form of pants, whether it be short pants or pants. But gym shorts and things like that, it can happen sometimes. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but if it does, make sure that your webcam is cutting you off here and not down lower. So, finally, the last thing is work with your employer also to make sure that the employer knows, remote employees need to feel appreciated. They need to feel part of the team. So whether it be including them in special ways in calls, or calling them out in special ways sometimes, or even just having remote-only things like a remote-only chat room, and having on-sites and things like that. One of the greatest things about working remote for the 2 companies I did is you're never part of the team on-site all the time, which means that when you do have an on-site with your teammates that you've only met through chat and through video and things like that, it's actually really focused. You're really interested in learning about that person. Whereas if you work in an office environment with that person every day of the week, work relationships are not like your best friend relationships. When you see them at a picnic later in the day, you're like, I have to be at this picnic with my workmates. When you have an on-site with a remote team, it's so focused and you're so passionately interested in team building at that time that team building exercises actually are fun instead of being some drudgery you have to do. So finally, those are all my tips. These are 3 books that I found to be helpful in different ways. Peopleware is my favorite. It's not actually written for remote work at all. It's about the human relationship in a work environment, especially with software teams. It's a classic, kind of, I would say, in the management realm, and some things are a slight bit dated, but it's really good. The Year Without Pants was from the developers behind WordPress.com, and it talks about their remote strategies for success. Remote Office Not Required is one of the older books in the space now. It's funny because it was new only like 5 or 10 years ago. But that's one book that has some of the ideas that weren't fully formed yet. So there's some things in there that are a little wishy-washy, I think, but it's still a good book with some solid ideas. Anyway, that's good. Thanks for coming here before lunch and not leaving early to get lunch. I hope that you learned a couple tips in here that will help you in your journey towards working from home more efficiently.